statistical, mathematical fact
never has been down.
has broken every single record. There is no asset that has come close.
It's the only thing in the industry that was not touched, that was not hacked, and it never fails doing what it promised in 2009. It's never
What's
failed.
the best performing asset the world has ever seen? And you'll find out that it's Bitcoin.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another live space with Oliver Velez. Of course, my name is Oliver Velez, and I'm your Bitcoiner for life, or at least I'd like to be. I'm trying to be. Anyway, welcome, guys. Welcome once again. I believe the last time we spoke here was just a few days ago. Come on in, make yourselves comfortable, grab the beverage of your choice, get something to take notes with. I like taking notes during informative podcast talks like the ones that we have here. For those of you who are experiencing one of my live talks for the very first time, I think it's important for you to know that I do not pass the mic during my spaces. I feel that my style of delivery, my form of sharing my information, my knowledge, my points of view are best served in the format of a monologue. You are certainly open and free to ask anything your heart desires during that monologue, and certainly after. I will try to take as many questions as I possibly can, despite the fact that the majority of my listenership up until this particular point, as small as it is, they tend to have very few questions. I don't know whether to take that personally or to take it as me being thorough enough to basically head off most questions before we approach the end. So I'm an optimist at heart, so I'll take the more optimistic view that my talks are thorough enough to satisfy most questions that come up during the monologue. But I do want you to understand that you can ask anything your heart desires. There is no topic or any particular thing that is off limits. All right. Many people ask me, Oliver, what do you mean by a 13 percenter? I am a 13 percenter. I've explained this in virtually every single live talk I've done at the start or at the top of every talk. So please refer to any past talks. And with that being said, I would love for you to follow my Bitcoin podcast. It's relatively new, but I'd love for you to follow that. It is called Bitcoin Unleashed. If you find anything we talk about here of interest, Bitcoin Unleashed can be found on virtually every single podcasting platform. So pick your poison. I like the Fountain app because you can earn free Satoshis listening to our talks, as well as the fact that that platform gives me the ability to take some of my long form talks and slice them up into more digestible clips. And I like that about Fountain. So I like those two things about Fountain. So um, I think you should listen to our talks there and take these things into digestible bite-sized amounts and in long form as well, and earn some free Satoshis while you're at it. All right. I have no association or affiliation with Fountain other than that being one of the podcasting platforms that I broadcast to. All right, guys. So listen, what motivated me to have this talk is the same thing that motivates almost all of my talks. I had a tweet or a zeet, whatever they're called here today, that generated quite a bit of interest. And to be honest with you, I'm not surprised that this tweet or zeet of mine did generate some interest, because each time I touch upon the topic of real estate, I get a lot of feedback and engagement, and that's always a good thing. Um, but each time I do talk about real estate, I do talk about it in the context of Bitcoin being a far more superior property. And that will never change. Real estate has been with us for, I guess, time immemorial, and we'll talk a bit about that. It has been part of the human experience forever. Um, and today it still remains at the heart and soul of a lot of societies, the way we think about value, and so forth and so on. But Bitcoin, in my opinion, has arisen in our lives, in our existences today, to actually show us how inferior real estate overall or property other than Bitcoin is overall in comparison to Bitcoin. There is nothing wrong about that. And it's something that I think it's a narrative that I think increasingly should be spread to people. Now, in my experience, the people that are most difficult to get to understand Bitcoin are those who are deeply entrenched in the real estate world. This is why I touch on the topic, because I do believe that that dogmatic view regarding real estate should be softened or broken up a bit. Um, and I've just found that the most stubborn individuals who basically refuse to even look at Bitcoin in any particular way are those that are deeply entrenched in real estate. I'd say the second group are those who are deeply entrenched in gold. I was one of them. Now, before I delve into this topic in greater detail, I do want to let you know that while I don't consider myself a real estate expert, I've owned and actually continue to own a great deal of real estate and all over the world, actually, on multiple different continents. I have been peeling off my holdings over the past 5 years plus, maybe even a little bit longer, but more aggressively over the past 2 to 3 years, actually. I'm down to my final 8 properties. I do plan to continue to peel down to just a smaller group of properties that I own, but even those 8 properties are spread across a few different continents. So while I'm no expert, I am a property owner. I am a homeowner many times over. Um, and these homes and properties are in a variety of different jurisdictions, as well as different countries and on different continents. And so while I don't think that makes me truly an expert because I don't make my living from that industry, I have done extraordinarily well in the real estate area or in the property ownership area. I've never lost in the area from a US dollar perspective. I've never had my hat handed to me. I've never had a negative experience that resulted in the loss of initial capital. Never. And so I don't want what I'm about to go into to be misunderstood as someone who has a black eye from the industry or who's been hurt in any way by the industry. It's been a boon for me. Um, it has been an important part of my life and more in more specifically my financial life. And so let me just say this. I grew up in a home, in a family that regarded ownership of property as extraordinarily important. My grandmother was very fond of saying, you make sure that as a man, you own the floors you walk on. She would tell me this all the time. Oliver, a man owns the floors that he walks on. Oliver, a man owns his home. Oliver, a man doesn't allow himself to be in a position where another man can tell him how to live. You own the floors you walk on. You own the walls that contain you, your life, your privacy. I grew up hearing this my entire life. I am a respecter of property ownership. And I was raised to understand how important it is. But all of this was actually before Bitcoin ever existed, before what I believe is the greatest and most superior property human beings have ever been exposed to. But before going in that direction, I'd like to um, go back a bit. I mean, way back. Let's take a historical look at real estate, property, land ownership. And I think it's important to understand that land or property ownership has all has for the most part throughout the modern human experience, land ownership has always been associated with wealth. You can go back hundreds, if not thousands of years, and the elite class, those that controlled things, those that dominated the world, or their particular societies at the time, they were the landowners. All right, the kings, the emperors, the land barons, the lords, etc. They were the wealthiest of society, while the peasants existed and lived out their lives at the lower end of that socioeconomic structure. And they actually earned their sustenance by lending their work and their services to those landowners. This has been the modern experience, the modern human experience for a very long time. And when I say modern, I'm talking about the last several thousand years. That's what I mean by modern. And this structure, even as late as um, the occupation of what became the United States by former Europeans, it was initially the landowners that had the right to vote. So land ownership and property ownership had as an important part of society, life, and as a symbol of wealth, power, and control has been with us a long time. This is deeply rooted in the human psyche. But it was slavery and indentured servitude. These institutions are what began to change things. You see, there was a point when land ownership and home ownership stopped being for the elite. There was a transition that began to take place that moved this exclusive right to own property, to own land, to own your own home. It moved it from the elite of society to general society itself. And it's important to understand how that transition happened, when it happened, and why it happened. Because what I'm here to tell you is that slavery and indentured servitude, those institutions served landowners well. And it was the transition away from the traditional slavery institution and the transition away from indentured servitudism that started this transition, this need to move home ownership and land ownership away from the elite to the masses as well. So there was a point when land or home ownership stopped being just for the wealthy. Now, let me go over this for a second. This warrants us peeling back the onion, if you will, just a little bit more. You see, during traditional slavery, and let's talk about the institution of slavery in the United States. It's the one I'm most intimate with through my study and so forth and so on. That there were plantations that housed a landowner's slaves. Most slave owners were landowners, and the workers of that land were the lowest of the low. They were slaves. And in the traditional form of slavery, you are, as a slave, provided with your home. You are provided with a home. You're provided with shelter. You are provided with your food. You are provided with your clothing. Now, it may not be the best home. It may not be the best clothing. It may not be the best food, but you are provided 100% with those things. In exchange for you being provided as a slave, your shelter, your home, the property you live on, the clothing you wear, the food that you eat. In exchange for those three items, you give up 100% of the fruits of your labor. Your time does not belong to you anymore. It belongs to the master. The fruits of your labor using that time, whatever you produce, whatever you do with your time, whatever you do with your body, whatever you do with your intelligence, your know-how, your skill, none of that belongs to you anymore because you have received the master's food, clothing, and shelter absolutely free. And so slavery is also an exchange, like everything else in life. It may not be a fair exchange, but it is still somewhat of an exchange. Now, it was the abolishment of slavery and indentured servitudism that actually began the transition away from land ownership only being for the elite class. During the American period, the US period of freeing slaves, every slave supposedly was supposed to receive an acre of land and a mule. 1 acre for every slave that was released and made free, and 1 mule to work their 1 acre of land. Now I'm going to speed up a little bit. What ultimately happened was that many of these slaves were very uneducated. Almost all of them were uneducated, unsophisticated, and did not know business and legal things to hold on to their property. Many of them literally signed their acres of property over to banks, other men, and many of them went right back to master and signed the free acre they received back to their former master in exchange for master taking care of them. Again, just not as a slave. And many of these slaves were uneducated, but still legally were simply able to write an X on a contract. That's all that was required by law, for the slave to write an X in the signature spot, and that X represented the transfer of ownership of the 1 acre that they received back to whoever was presenting them the contract. So now you should know where X marks the spot comes from. Now you should know where the movement that kicked off many people changing their last names to X to symbolize this act, what many refer to as an egregious act of stealing the property and the land ownership away from former slaves. X marked the spot. But I digress a little bit because where I want to go with this is how this led to a more sophisticated form of slavery. You see, the slave returning back to his former master with his 1 acre of land and signing it back over to his former master with an X really led to a new form of slavery, which was sharecropping. And so, what the former master would say is that, listen, in exchange for your piece of land, I will rent you this. I will rent you something bigger. You will be allowed to work this land. It's not your land, it's my land, but it's really kind of like your land. You will now have some fruits of your labor from tilling the soil of this land, but your payment to me must be this. And what this period began to do, what this sharecropping period began to do, was to start the early formation of partial land ownership, but not kind of like ownership, but kind of like ownership, not really ownership, but not really ownership. Like I live on it, but is it I live on it every day. I can do what I want with it, but it's still not quite mine, but it's kind of like mine. You know what I'm saying. So as long as the sharecropper paid his share of the crops from that property, he could treat the property as his. For all practical purposes, the property was his. No one really told him what to do with it, how to do it, what to do with it, as long as the payment for that property was made. And this was the early formation of property no longer being exclusively for the elite, no longer exclusively for the wealthy, but sort of a quasi property ownership scenario. Now, this began the transition from when land and property was only for the elite to when land and property started becoming not just for the elite, but for others as well. Now, let's fast forward in the United States, because that's the only country I can speak with some degree of authority about. Let's fast forward to World War II, shall we? During World War II, or toward the end of World War II, all right, you had a scenario where almost 11 million men and women were released from the armed services. World War II was coming to an end. More and more people that had been recruited to fight that war in the United States were being released back into society. 11 million, which at that time was a very big, healthy chunk of the entire country's population. These 11 million men and women that were released from armed sources, starting from the middle of the 1940s into the early 1950s, they were empowered with government insured loans that gave them the right for low down payments on new homes. And for the first time in American history, something called the 30-year term, or the 30-year mortgage, came into existence. This was specifically created as an incentive for young people to leave their families to go fight the war. They were given the promise and the ability to come back to American shores at the end of the war, to have government sponsored money or loans, low down payment requirements, and a special time was created for them, 30 years, to pay off the property. And it was during this period, this push, that kicked off what we commonly refer to today as the multi-decade bull run in personal homes and personal property. It started really right here in the mid 1940s into the 50s. And this became a big boon for the banking sector. The banking sector began to make money hand over fist by it becoming chic, by homeownership and putting individuals in debt for 30 years of the heart of all of their working life, by creating a system, an approach that made people want to go back to a form of indentured servitude, a system that was packaged to create the sharecropper like experience where it's your property in a way, but I hold the title. I will let you stay on this property, but I hold the title. I will let you call this your property, but I hold the real ownership. And as long as you pay me, you can say this is yours. As long as you pay me, you don't have the title to it. But as long as you pay me, you can do what you like for the most part with the property. Is it yours? Not really. Will we say it's yours? Yes. Will we market the fact that will we market it like it's yours? Yes. Will we call it home ownership? Yes. Is it really ownership? No. How do you own something that you don't have the title to? So, what all of this really is just a more sophisticated sharecropping arrangement. All this is a more sublime, fancier financial setup for a form of indentured servitude. And because each property over a 30-year period is paid for 4, 5, sometimes as many as 10 times the value of the property itself over that period of time, it became a financial boon to banks, which ultimately became Wall Street driven in nature. And so the elites began to market this idea amongst all American people. This happened all over the world as well, that homeownership was the way to go. And it was a financially driven mechanism. It had nothing to do ultimately with empowering the people. It had everything to do with just finding a way to quadruple, to quintuple, and sometimes 10x the value of the property. The same thing that used to be pulled on the former slaves, the sharecroppers. You pay me X and this property is yours for the rest of your life. And so understanding that this is the setup is, I think, extraordinarily important because it can only be a setup if you're operating from the foundation of a broken money. This type of arrangement can only potentially be beneficial or can only exist if the money is broken. Because when the money is not broken, the prices of property and homes do not rise. Listen to me carefully, Bitcoiners. Listen to me carefully, traders, individuals, supporters, haters, groups. Listen to me carefully. The prices of property, the prices of homes do not naturally go up in value. They go down in value over time. No one in their right mind would agree that something that I have used for 30 years, beat up, something that is nowhere near as new, nowhere close to the condition that I purchased it in, should actually sell for 20 times more or 10 times more. That is only in clown world that actually exists. And because it has been so indoctrinated in our society, because we're so brainwashed to believe that no, an old house, an older house that I used and beat up should be worth more. We've been so brainwashed that it makes sense to us today, but that doesn't make sense. All right. My used things should not sell for more than what I purchased it for before it was used. In a world where your money is not broken, all things go down in price, they don't go up in price. So in truth, property values don't rise. In truth, home values don't rise. What's happening is that the unit of account that you're measuring the value by is declining. Your dollars are losing purchasing power, which is creating the illusion that the value of your house is rising. The value of your house is actually not rising. The purchasing power of your unit of account of your dollar is declining. Let me give you an example here. My mother purchased a home in 1972 for $35,000. She put $3,000 down on this property. She sold that home a couple of decades later, the same home for 30 that she bought for 35,000. She sold it for $850,000. Now, some people would say, well, that's a great score. Did the value of that home go up, or did the dollar's purchasing power decline? This purchase of my mother's just so happened to be right around the time when the US government severed the dollar's convertibility into gold. So we took the final step of going completely off the gold standard, which accelerated the devaluation of the dollar and its purchasing power more rapidly than at any other point in history. And this largely began to fuel. This is what fueled the illusion that your property values are going up. But when you factor in the loss of purchasing power against the so-called or seeming rise against your property, it doesn't net out to be that big. As a matter of fact, I've done the math for you. Some of you who think your property values go up 10 or 12% a year are really experiencing 2 to 3% up a year on average valuations when you factor in M2 money supply and you factor in the debasement of the purchasing power of your unit of account, namely the US dollar. So if a dollar in 1972 buys half of what it does of buys half of the value, or buys only 35% of the value in 2023, you have to factor in the loss of your purchasing power with the dollar against the gain of your property over that time, because it's the loss of the purchasing power of the dollar that is actually the majority of the seeming price rise in your property. That it just takes 65% more dollars to buy the same home. You only get a net rise if the dollar's purchasing power stays the same in 1972, 73 to now. That's the only time that you really have a true real gain. If the dollar's purchasing power does not erode, and the value of your property goes up. But in a scenario where your purchasing power doesn't erode, property values don't go up because they're used. My mother's property that she sold several decades later for $850,000, the neighborhood had gotten run down. Crime rose quite dramatically from the time she bought to the time she sold. The school systems had been eroded over that time. My mother never added to the property. All right. It was nowhere near the mint condition she bought it in, yet she was able to sell it for 850,000. Only in a freaking clown world does that work. Only in a world where your money is broken does that work. And so it should be clear when you see this for what it is, that Bitcoin as a property itself, which does not lose power, a property that you can't lose purchasing power. You can't lose purchasing power in over time, that can't be debased, that can't be eroded, is a far more superior property. And what I find interesting, what I find interesting is how we're so indoctrinated that we're so indoctrinated and brainwashed still to believe that there is some true premium that is deserved in a used up piece of property, that we fail to see the characteristics that prove that that's not true. So let me touch on this topic of what utility value is and what a monetary premium value is. And I'm actually surprised and shocked this very day that there are people that still don't understand this concept. But that's neither here nor there now. Let's delve into it just for a second. Most things have some utility value. Not all things, but most things. A home has a utilitarian value. It serves as your shelter. It serves as a place to raise your family. That's utility. All right. Utility value does not have substantial price increases, value increases. Utilitarian value historically stays rather stable. And homes, I'm not talking about all forms of property here. I'm just talking more specifically about homes here. Homes have a utilitarian value, but even commercial property has a utilitarian value. It has utility. What has mushroomed because of this broken system and because of the debasement of the monetary unit, because of the loss of purchasing power of the dollar, property, real estate, has developed what's called a monetary premium on top of the utilitarian value. So there's a point at which you leave the value of utility and start going extra. This is now worth more than its utilitarian value. That's called monetary premium. And real estate has been a good investment over the last several decades because its premium, the price over and beyond its utility, has been allowed to mushroom along with the debasement of the US dollar, the monetary unit. And it's this premium above the true value, which is utility value. It's that premium that it has made it somewhat profitable. Not as profitable as you think, but somewhat profitable, marginally profitable. Now, when I say this, I always get pushback by people who are in hot markets. Please understand, this is barring the exceptions, barring the hot markets, the Miamis, the Manhattans of the world, the Westchester counties of the world, where I lived most of my adult life. I'm, the various pockets in California. I'm not talking about these pockets. There are always outliers in a data set. I'm talking generally speaking. Generally speaking, this is the case. What's the case? That real estate has been marginally profitable. And it's only been marginally profitable because of the monetary premium that's been allowed to grow over and beyond its utilitarian value. But what a lot of people fail to understand or incorporate in their overall analysis of real estate is exactly what I mentioned in my last post. They don't incorporate, they fail to understand that this is a property that is taxed forever. It is usually something that you have interest costs, a mortgage and an interest cost associated with it forever. There's maintenance forever. There's upkeep forever. If it's a property you need managed, there's management forever. Depreciation on the property, the breakdown of the property, the wear and tear on the property forever. It's always a liquid as an asset in most cases. Your real estate is subject to inflation. It has always interest rate risk if you're constantly refinancing the debt you owe on the property. There's always legal involved, and there's always the possibility that it can be confiscated by eminent domain. All of these things, along with its immovability, along with the property being subject to the political whims of the day, all of these things chop down the real true value of real estate as it's been marketed to us. We don't hold the title to it. We pay taxes on it forever. Most people pay a mortgage and have interest expense forever. Most people have upkeep and maintenance forever. There will forever be wear and tear on the property, and so forth and so on. And so when you factor in the monetary debasement of the unit you're valuing the property in, it on averages comes out to about 3%. And that's during the best times, 3 to 4%. And I know there's always someone who's Oliver, their properties are going up 40%. Guys, look, I have properties in Medellin, Colombia that gone up 400%. 400% in a couple of years. 60% just this year. I understand hot pockets. I'm not talking about that. I am talking generally speaking. And so what I think it's important to understand is that real estate is not bad. I am not saying that it is bad. I do think it's important to understand where the push came from, how it is used as a tool to enslave the vast majority of people by keeping them mired in debt and by keeping them on the hamster wheel working for other men forever. That is part of the real estate trap. The lifelong indebtedness is part of the trap. The fact that you don't own the title during this lifetime payment into it is part of the trap. And yes, you have been able to sell the property for a higher US dollar price in most cases than before. But I believe that that error is starting to wane and will ultimately come to an end, like all errors do. You no longer have lower and lower and lower interest rates. And this is another thing that people who are loosely in the real estate game, they fail to recognize or purposefully ignore for one reason or another, that one of the biggest fuels behind the real estate surge over the past 40 years in particular is interest rates declining from near 20% down to zero. And so the name of the game was to constantly refinance. Interest rates are going lower, you refinance, which gave you almost an instantaneous profit. You refinance. As interest rates drop, you refinance. Well, that game is over. You're no longer going to have another 40 years of lower interest rates from this particular point. You'll have a tiny incy bit lower, but you're not getting a 40-year decline in interest rates anymore. So the real estate world has lost that jet fuel that was basically 80+% of why it did so well during the last 4 decades. That period is over. And thank God that as it's over, a new period of property ownership has come into existence for us, namely Bitcoin. And what is so beautiful and unique about Bitcoin is that despite the fact that the traditional property ownership and realtorship ownership was supposed to be for more of the masses during this transition after slavery, it still remains somewhat elite and only was made available to the middle to upper middle class of society, that your lower classes still largely were not homeowners. Well, this brand new form of property ownership called Bitcoin has come to change that, because for the first time in the human experience, Bitcoin is a property that is accessible to every human being on earth, yet it is a property that is not controlled or touched or manipulated by any human being. Every human being can access it. Every human being has a right to hold it, yet it is also a property that is not subject to the control, manipulation, or shenanigans of any human being. And so the first time property rights can be has is every human being can have property rights. We're born with property rights. We ourselves, our body is our first form of property. And what this body acquires is supposed to be extending my property ownership. Well, for the first time, there are no classes when it comes to property ownership. Everyone can gain access to the brand new property. Everyone can accrue the benefits from this property. And this is a property that can't be stolen. This is a property that is not taxed if you just hold it. This is a property that is impervious to political whims. This is a property that cannot be stopped, cannot be confiscated, cannot be stolen. This is a property not for the elite, but for every human being on planet Earth. It is a property that cannot be debased. It is a property that cannot lose value over time. It is a property that is mathematically designed to go up every single 4 years of its existence. Do you understand the importance of that? Having a property that is literally rooted in math, the most certain thing in the universe, math that is specifically designed to ensure that every 4 years it's higher in value. And Bitcoin will be higher in value every 4 years for the rest of your life, not just for the rest of your life, but for the lives of your children, their children, their children, and their children. People in your family line not even born yet will be experiencing the benefits of this 4-year rise in value proposition of Bitcoin. It's mathematically designed to be that way. And so when I say, has Bitcoin made property, when I ask, has Bitcoin made property ownership irrelevant or real estate investing irrelevant? Yes and no. I am not talking about the ownership of the floors that you walk on, ownership of the land or property on which you raise your family, your children. That is not what I'm talking about. That I believe Bitcoin is starting to make obsolete. Owning the floors you walk on will never be obsolete. Owning the land on which you raise your family will never be obsolete. What will become more and more obsolete is having 27 properties because that's the way you beat the system. That's being made obsolete. Using real estate as a store of value when your net gain is 3-4% a year, and Bitcoin has a CAGR of over 200% a year, a cumulative average growth rate of over 200% a year. It just doesn't make sense. And some people tell me, say, Oliver, listen, but what about me buying a piece of property and renting it out and taking the income from it to live off of? And I say, well, if real estate is your business and how you support yourself, that is a completely different thing. If real estate is your profession, we need real estate professionals, then that is a completely separate issue. If the way you put food on the table is you're a mortgage broker or you're in the real estate business, or the way you and your family eat is through rental properties, that is completely different from what I'm talking about. I am talking about real estate as an investment. That is not the way you make your living. That is not the way you support your life. That is only used as a store of value. We have a more superior store of value today. And it doesn't make sense for you to choose real estate over Bitcoin as a store of value. It doesn't. There is no math, no period in time that suggests that that is true ever since Bitcoin came into existence. There's no math. There's not even a brief period of time where that's been made so. It just no longer makes sense as a store of value now that real estate, now that Bitcoin has come into existence. But as your primary residence, absolutely. As your business, if that's your expertise, that's a completely different matter. But I will say this, if you are looking for an income stream by buying a bunch of rental properties today and living off the rents, I think that you'd be served better. This is my opinion, not financial advice, by the way. You'd be served better putting all of those down payments that you're going to put down on Bitcoin. You'll enjoy, over time, you'll enjoy a far greater, by orders of magnitude, you'll enjoy a much more impactful price increase in your investment than in the real estate itself. And if you were looking for rental properties, which are going to gain you what, 5-10% a year, shave off 5 to 10% of your Bitcoin every single year and live off of that. And you can probably do that forever without ever running out of your Bitcoin. Shaving off 5 to 10% a year forever, because the price gains over time will more than replace your 5 to 10% that you're peeling off. You can create an income stream from your Bitcoin. This simple math. It's not rocket science. That's not complex. And I believe that products like this that make it very easy for the common man to do this with their Bitcoin is coming to us in the next few years, not the next few decades, the next few years. You're going to be able to live off your Bitcoin. You're going to be able to not have to sell it in large amounts. You're going to be able to borrow against your Bitcoin at will and at whim. You're going to be able to get anything on planet Earth you want with the most pristine collateral on planet Earth. Why is it more pristine than your piece of property? Why is Bitcoin more pristine than your home, than your land, than your farm? Because it is infinitely divisible, because it has mobility. It is not subject to one location, one market, one type of buyer. It is universal in nature. It is global in nature. It is immutable. It is outside the purview and the control of every single government on earth, every single individual. It is open 24 hours a day. It is never down, never sick at sea, and it happens to be the most secure network the planet Earth has ever been exposed to. It is fungible in nature. It is transferable and transportable through space and time. And it's invincible. You can't hack it. You can't stop it. You can't halt it. You can't control it. You can't even outlaw it. How do you outlaw 12 words? How? How do you outlaw math? 1 + 1 = 2. How do you outlaw math? How do you outlaw language? Oh, you're no longer going to be able to use the letter B in our language because that stands for Bitcoin. No one can outlaw letters. No one can outlaw words. No one can outlaw math. Bitcoin is math. Bitcoin is letters. Bitcoin is words. And because it's digital in nature, it is available to every living human being, and every living being living on planet Earth today can access Bitcoin without the permission of anyone and absolutely free. No document needs to be signed, no approval process needs to be gone through, making it truly the most global asset the world has ever come in contact with. You can't do that with Apple. Can't do that with Google stock. You can't do that with farmland. You can't do that with homes. You can't do that with any asset on planet Earth. Property now is available to 8 billion people right now, this second, instantly. And some people say, well, Oliver, there's a lot of poor people in the world. How can you say that the poor people have access to Bitcoin when it's $37,000 a coin? You fail to realize that if that person has some value to deliver to society and the world, it will cost them nothing to send a receive address to me, and I can send Bitcoin to them, Satoshis to them in exchange for their value. No approval, no documents, no signing, no going to a teller, no cost, no anything. If you can deliver value, you can receive Bitcoin. If you can do something for someone else that someone wants, you can receive Bitcoin. And the thing that I'm getting at is that it's a property. It's digital property. It's the best property of all because by it being digital, it's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. When's the last time you touched an album, a music album? Tell me, I'll wait. If I were to say go touch an album today, 98% of you wouldn't be able to do it. You say, well, I can't touch an album today, Oliver. I don't have an album. And I would say, well, you don't have music? And you say, yeah, of course. I said, well, what kind of music do you have access to? Well, I have access to millions of songs, tens of millions. How? Streaming, Spotify, whatever. Well, when's the last time you touched it? I can't touch it. Why? Because it's digital. How do you give music? How do you realize that there was a time where the only people who could experience real music, they had to go to a symphony, they had to go to an orchestra, they had to go to a club to see a group. Then the music went to the next level of being put on plastic called vinyl records. And more people could access the music because they didn't have to go to one physical location to see an orchestra, a band, a choir, a singer. They could just receive the plastic. And that plastic went from being big plastic to small plastic, which meant that it could be sent to more if it was smaller. It became thinner, which meant that it could be sent with less cost because it was thinner. And then it went to nothingness. It went all the way into the digital realm. And now music can be given to all 8 billion people on earth. Why? Because it was vinyl? No. Why? Because it became plastic? No. Why? Because it became digital. I've got 50,000 digital photos in my cell phone right now. That's just one of them. I have 4 of them. I have 4 cell phones. I have 4 smartphones. In one phone, I have 50,000 digital photos. Ask me when the last time I touched a physical freaking photo album. I've got them. They're in boxes somewhere. Many of you don't even have them. You're not old enough. I think I've got something like 10 photo albums from back in the day. But I've got 50,000 digital photos. I've never touched them a single day in my life, but they still give me joy. I still show them. I still send them. I still get the same experience from them, yet I can't touch them. I can't taste them. I can't feel them. They're digital. The digitization of real estate is here. The digitization of property is here. The digitization of your homes are here as stores of value. And because of the digitization of music, music is available to the world. Because of the digitization of movies, movies are available to a larger portion of the population. Because of the digitization of property, property is now available to every single human being on earth. And before Bitcoin, most people on earth could never be a property owner or enjoy the freedoms that property ownership offered, or enjoy the benefits that accrued to property owners. I thank God for Bitcoin. Thank God that for the first time in the human experience, everyone can be a property owner. Rob says, and the other phone has some Bitcoin. All of my phones have some Bitcoin. I always walk around, guys, with some pocket change of Satoshis. When I say I've never spent a Satoshi, this is true, but also it's not true. Um, I've I have spent to support businesses that I come across. So, for instance, a coffee shop that accepts Bitcoin in Colombia, I'll do it with my Satoshis in small amount of. I always keep a couple $100 on me in Satoshis to do that. And then at the end of wiping it out, I replace it. All right. And so I do a spend and replace, but only to support companies and organizations and people that are bold enough to stand up this early in the game and say, I'll accept it. All right. So I always do that. I am not a big believer that you spend your property. I'm not a big believer that you take your farm and you go to the gas station and say, how do I chip off a portion of this farm that I own to fill my tank up with gas? No. So your major wealth in Bitcoin should not be used for anything except as a vault, a store of your value. Your pocket change, on the other hand, in a hot wallet, can be used for little small inconsequential things. All right. Anyway, let's see. What else are we going here? Anybody else have any questions? Guys, I just thought I'd add some flesh to this topic because it just got so much traction. And there's a Zeet can only go so far with nuance, so I like having these talks that give me sort of a greater opportunity to dig a tiny bit deeper, you know? Uh, Stuart Chris says, wow, Oliver is basically calling the entire real estate Twitter community a bunch of contemporary sharecroppers. Listen, guys, you always have to look at, you always have to follow the money. Do you understand? You always have to follow the money. And so it's, while it's easy to do it when you're dealing with a non-institution, right? So when you're dealing with me and I say, look, I have these pair of sneakers that I've used for the past 2 years. They're a little worn, but I want to sell you these sneakers for twice the value that I bought them for. And then I want to put you on a payment plan for these used sneakers, right? And I bought the sneakers for $200. I want to sell the sneakers to you for $400 after I've used them for 2 years. So I want you to pay double than what I paid. And I'm going to put you on a payment plan that will ensure that if you ever pay me back the $400, you will have wind up paying me $1,400. Now, how's that? Now, no one in their right mind would accept that, but that is what we've been sold. Do you understand? That we've been sold that that's good. You say, well, Oliver, come on, you can't compare sneakers to real estate. Well, yeah, both things are consumer items, right? Both things have a utility value. The sneakers can be used that I'm selling you, the home can be used that I'm selling you. So they both have a utilitarian value. They're both consumer goods, right? But when I apply that same model to something like sneakers, you're like, oh, wait a minute, Oliver. You think I'm a dummy? No, I don't. But I do think that you're not critically thinking when you don't take that same critical view to that sneaker scenario and put it to your property scenario. And don't see it for what it is. You have to follow the money to understand that you are being sold something to benefit someone else. How do they benefit? They benefit by more than quintupling the price on you, keeping you in debt, giving you the right to say you own the property when you don't. You don't own a property you don't have the title to. And so, yeah, That was this, we started that with sharecropping and indentured servitude. Indentured servitude used to give 7 years of service for a little piece of land that they could then raise their family on. People would come from Europe, right, and work for a landowner in the United States, in the new America, and say, listen, if you, the landowner would tell the indentured servitude, if you work my land for 7 years, I'll let you stay here. You got to work this piece of land right here. I'll let you stay here. I will give you your sustenance, your food. You can bring your wife, your kids, but you got to work the land. And I get all the proceeds. But for 7 years, you won't have to worry about a bed. You won't have to worry about a place to stay. You won't have to worry about hot food. And after 7 years, I will give you this piece of land to work as long as you pay me this. That's indentured servitudism, which was the beginning of property ownership away from the elite, which really is not the elite ever really letting it go because they still hold the title. Come on, guys. You got to know your history. You got to know your history. All right, let me see. Is there anything else here? I'm gonna see if you guys never ask questions, man. Never. Rob says, I feel like I'm in church every time I hear you preach the orange thing. Yeah, Rob. I grew up in church actually, because I grew up in two places during my childhood. I spent the majority of time during the week in the library because my mother was an assistant librarian. This was her career, right? She wasn't a librarian, she was an assistant to a librarian. And I was ordered to go straight to the library every single school day of my life for longer than I care to remember. And so, what do you do in the library after you finish your homework in 30 minutes or 40 minutes? What do you do until 8 o'clock at night every single day? I'm there at 3:30 to 8 every single day, Monday through. What do? You read. I've read every single book in my mother's library. My mother, in fact, actually put it in order to change to the town's biggest library because her son had read everything twice in her library. So I spent the majority of my adolescent life, my young adolescent, my young life in the library. And on the weekends, and sometimes during the week too, I spent it in frickin' church. Library and church. Library and church. That was my life, guys. Ah, Oliver, what do you think of El Salvador investment property? No taxes, still sharecropping. Now, look, guys, there are good questions, stewardship. There are some scenarios that are really unique, like in anything. Again, when I talk about these things, I am talking about them in a general way. You know, there are some unique scenarios which I have even taken advantage of in the real estate space, in the property space. All right. There's a property that went up 400% in 2.5 years that I have. That's crazy. That outperformed Bitcoin during that brief period of time. Now, if I hold it long enough, it will not. But yeah. So there are some scenarios where you put zero, there's zero out of pocket. There's positive cash flow that comes from the zero out of pocket investment and things of that nature. No taxes, grandfathered into this, that. These are unique scenarios. I'm not talking about unique. I'm talking about what most of the 8 billion people on earth are going to be exposed to. I've got to speak from that perspective. I can't, this, my trade, I get traders all the time that do this on me. I say, look, I tell them something. I say, look, this happens 8 times out of every 10. You can get rich just doing this, betting that it's going to go this way. Because if you do it 10 times, on average, it'll happen 8 times this way. There will be 2 times on average that it won't. But on average, it'll happen 8 times out of every 10. And invariably, I have traders that say, Oliver, look at this. It didn't happen. Yeah. Oliver, look at this one. It didn't happen this time. Yeah, I told nothing's 100%, dude. I told you 8 times. Why are you showing me the 2 instead of focusing on the 8? Why are you majoring in the minor instead of majoring in the major? Guys, when I have my talks, I have to major in the major. I have to talk about what 80% of the people are going to be exposed to and experience, not the very, very small exceptions. That's not broad enough to talk about. Everybody wants to point to the exception. Everybody wants to point to that unique thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what 80+% of the people are going, where 80% of the people are going to find themselves in this situation where they're going to say, should I put I'm looking for an investment. Should I make an investment in this building right here, or should I make an investment in Bitcoin? I think for that person, if they look closely enough, they'll win hands down every time with Bitcoin and twice on Sunday. It's for that person, not the specialist that can pick through something and find this unique opportunity that's like a freaking layup. That's approaching it more like a business. I'm not talking about that. So, yes, you got a scenario where there's no taxes, no out of pocket expense on your part, and you get a positive cash flow from it, by all means. But if you've got to pull out some serious coin to start that, to put down on that, that's what I'm saying. Wait a minute. That's where you should have some pause, guys. Because that should be looked at with a 118% multiplier. Do you understand what I mean by that? So what was the company? Is it Bank of America has a 118% multiplier on Bitcoin. So what I tell people to do is take whatever investment that you're going to make in something else outside of Bitcoin. Now I want you to take that number and multiply it times 118. Do that for me. And see, now judge. I think you got 118 potential over time, not overnight. Over time, not overnight. 118 times this investment. You gonna do that there? If it's not even close, then you got your answer. You're gonna beat a 213% CAGR? No, the NASDAQ hasn't beat that in 10 years. The NASDAQ's CAGR over 10 years is 16%. Bitcoin's 213%, not even in the same galaxy. And then when you want to go real estate, it's 4%. You want to go bonds, it's like 3%. Real estate's 7. All right, I'll give it. If you incorporate all the great areas, 7 to 8% real estate, CAGR. Stocks are the Nasdaq's been 16%. The S&P over the last 10 years has been 13%, 14%. Bonds have been 2 to 3% and going down rapidly. Gold has been negative 2%. Cash is negative 9%. So from negative 9 to 2 to 3% to 6 to 7% to 12 to 16% is all you get in everything else. And then you jump to 213% Bitcoin. Guys, it's hard to even consider anything else other than that. And this is going to become increasingly more blatantly obvious to you as the brainwashing from traditional finance starts to wear off, and as Bitcoin continues to stick in your face that there is no second best. And it's going up forever, Laura. It's going up forever. All right, guys, look, thank you for attending. Thank you for coming. Thank you for I just thank you for being here. You know, I'm always fond of saying that when you're here, whether you're here live or listening to this in a recorded fashion, you are giving me something that you can never get back. You're giving me the only thing that's really more precious than Bitcoin, which is your time. You can't get your time back. I appreciate you giving it to me. And I made a vow almost 3 decades ago that I would do my very best to deliver something of value, something that I believed in my heart and soul you'd be able to use over and beyond this particular point in time that we share together. I hope I've done that here today. I hope I've delivered something of value. I hope I've caused you to think about something. And if I haven't, if I failed in that regard, I promise you every single time I'm going to get better and better and better. I'm going to try. All right, guys, listen, enjoy the rest of your day. And you know what to do. Go to work. Go to work, Bitcoiners. Stack harder. My name is Oliver Velez, and I am your 13%er Bitcoiner. Be safe out there, and until next time. Boom!